This is the lecture for European history for Tuesday, 15th of February 2022. And we have just seen the Ejército de Chile, the Chilean Army's annual military march to heavy metal music, where we saw goose-stepping Chileans in modern uniforms, in 19th century Prussian uniforms, in mid-20th century Nazi Wehrmacht-style uniforms, and with other bits of military hardware on display. Men and women soldiers. And Chilean women soldiers obviously have regulation makeup, including lipstick, which you saw if you were watching. The point of that was to show what Prussian drill looks like. Prussian drill is going to be at the heart of what Bismarck is able to achieve, because the Prussian army is the sword that Bismarck will wield to unify Germany. It will not be by speeches, parliaments, and majority decisions that the great issues of our time will be decided, but by Blut und Eisen und Blut actually, by iron and blood. So Bismarck is going to use war as a means of unifying the country. Understand, throughout history, wars happen for many reasons. They always include worry over who will control the future. Last year, when we talked about the Peloponnesian War, you may recall that I said that Athens and Sparta had about as much to fight about as a lion and a tiger shark. In other words, they're not even in the same environment. And yet they fought a 27-year-old long bloodletting that destroyed Athens and weakened Sparta. Why? Because they wondered who would control the future. So worry about that is certainly a part of these wars of unification. But here's the secret, and it's a rather important secret now. The Chinese Communist Party, which is behind almost every difficulty faced by the world today, has just lost face massively in their Olympics. I'm glad they did, because they are a genocidal regime. Holding the Olympics in China this year is worse than holding the Olympics in Nazi Germany in 1936 with Hitler presiding, because in 1936 Hitler was not yet committing genocide against the Jews. He was doing horrible things to the Jews, but not yet trying to wipe them out as an entire race of people. For decades, the Chinese Communist Party has been, and still is, trying to wipe out the Tibetan people, the Uyghur people of Xinjiang, and other ethnic minorities. They have the ones that are alive in concentration camps, in re-education camps, in labor camps, and those they kill, they harvest for bodily organs to sell on the international black market. To give a regime like that international credibility, like with the Olympics, they're doing worse things than Hitler ever did. And that's saying something. And they're doing them now as the athletes are competing. Also, it doesn't really look good when your ski jump is right next to cooling towers to an ugly-looking nuclear power plant in the middle of an industrial district that looks like it's straight out of some dystopian Mad Max movie about a post-apocalyptic future. Beijing did not look good and does not look good. The fact that I could go on and on. It was not a good Olympics. It was not a good look. The Communist Party of China was arrogant, and they overplayed their hand. They've got a lot of problems. Putin's government is in trouble because the Russian economy is absolutely based on the price of oil. It's as based on the price of oil as Saudi Arabia's economy and Venezuela's economy, and all of those economies rise and fall with the price of oil. Now, Russia has other fuels. It has natural gas, which it sells to Europe, but it also is a petroleum-producing country. It's very, very important. For years, under the previous administration, the price of oil had tanked, and this had damaged Putin's ability to give the Russian people even the decent standard of living. Putin's government, therefore, has been weakened, and the current economy of the world is not good, thanks to COVID. So, what to do? Well, the Chinese Communist Party has the same question: what to do? Well, I will go a third, and you don't have to agree with me about this. In fact, if you want to argue hammer and tongs with me, be my guest. The Biden administration in its first year of office has plummeted. It has historically low polls. Donald Trump looks like a popular president compared to Joe Biden. Inflation has gone up, which hurts every single American. The value of every dollar that we have is less, significantly less than it was a year ago, and there's no sign of it stopping. And the reasons for this inflation have to do with Biden's financial policies. Biden also has had a hostile policy towards the energy industry. So instead of being an oil exporter, which we were under the previous administration, now the price of oil has shot through the roof, which is also contributing to inflation because a number of energy producers in the United States have been shut down, along with several pipelines. In Afghanistan, Biden was humiliated in a way that I've never seen an American president be humiliated, including Jimmy Carter, including the retreat from Vietnam in 1975. And his administration seems out of touch as he seems to struggle with issues of memory and senility. He is not in a good, strong position, and his COVID policies are increasingly unpopular. The Trudeau administration in Canada has just declared an unprecedented state of emergency, as if the country was beset by terrorism, he will be called it. But in fact, what they're beset by are truckers who've gone to the Capitol with their families to peacefully protest against COVID policies in Canada. And instead of talking to the truckers, or instead of being at all reasonable, Trudeau has treated them like pariahs, like every nasty name in the book. And yesterday, he declared a state of emergency, which gives him dictatorial power. That's not an exaggeration. Look at the news yourself. See what he's done. When governments become weak at home, throughout history there is a tendency to launch a war or to engage in a war. China and Taiwan, Russia and Ukraine, possibly the United States and Ukraine also, in order to get people to rally around the flag, forget their differences, and come together under the leader. If you're unpopular at home, and you have the option of fighting a war that you think you can win quickly, it's tempting to go to war. Because there is a rally around the flag effect. There is a sense that if our troops are in danger, we've all got to come together to make sure that they win. So because of the weakness of the Chinese Communist Party, because of the weakness of the Russian dictator, because of the weakness of the present administration in the United States, I throw Canada in, not that I think Canada is going to engage in military action, but because it's another government that's not strong at home. The chance of war is actually higher than it usually is, because a politician might make a political calculation that war will boost your poll numbers and make it easier for you to govern at home, which historically is a very dangerous gamble. Because the thing about war is it's completely unpredictable. And when people start getting killed, the rules go out the window. You want to understand war, don't look at Vietnam or Korea or any of the wars after World War II. Study the last few years of World War II. Cities bombed out by napalm, atomic bombs, shelling cities into rubble. This notion of rules of war is nonsense. Because desperate people, when their back's against the wall, will do whatever they need to do to win or to survive. And you will see the beast inside people if we have a serious war between industrialized nations. So when I say, and I'm about to get to you, when I say that Bismarck is going to use war to unify Germany, that's not actually a non sequitur. He's going to use war to get people to rally around Prussia's king and Prussia's flag and Prussia's government. And it works. It can work. Thank you.
I was going to ask if you could elaborate on how Biden was humiliated in Afghanistan or wherever you said it was. I never heard about that.
Okay.
So.
We were fighting in Afghanistan since October of 2001 because the Taliban government of Afghanistan hosted Al-Qaeda during the 9/11 attacks. They allowed Al-Qaeda to plan the attacks from there. And the Taliban was notorious around the world for destroying Buddhist shrines, wiping out minority populations, enforcing Sharia law with assault rifles. They were a nasty group, and they were directly involved in the murder of 3,000 Americans and others. So President Bush conquered Afghanistan. And he didn't do what the Russians did. The Russians had tried to conquer Afghanistan for 10 years. It was their Vietnam. They lost over 50,000 dead. They lost hundreds of thousands wounded. We helped the Afghanis fight the Russians in the 1980s. So we didn't try to conquer Afghanistan to rule it as an American colony, the way the Russians did. What we tried to do was have the domestic enemies of the Taliban overthrow them. And so we did that. 2001, 2002. We almost captured bin Laden also. But we do it with relatively few troops. Now, for the next 20 years, the United States is involved in trying to shore up Afghani governments that are somewhat democratic against two forces. Against the Pakistani army, which backs the Taliban in Pakistan, and their sponsors, the Chinese Communist Party, which is the sponsor of the Pakistani army. And ultimately, their strategy is to wear us out. They just have to hold on and remain intact, and they can do that by being in Pakistan. We can't get them there. And sooner or later, America will leave, and they'll take over. And that was their strategy. Now, we were in the process of a staged withdrawal from Afghanistan during the previous administration. But the previous administration made it clear, if you humiliate us, if you come in and start slaughtering people or whatever, we're coming back. And the Taliban, during the last year of Trump, didn't do that. They didn't do any big-scale attacks. Last summer, last August, President Biden made it clear to the military he wanted to be completely out of Afghanistan by the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So the way that we pulled out of Afghanistan had nothing to do with the way the Taliban was behaving. We pulled out quickly, so quickly that the allies we had promised we would take care of weren't taken care of. Many of them, thousands of them, were left behind. Over 1,000 Americans were left behind. And one of the things that he did, that Biden's military did, is they pulled out of Bagram Air Force Base before they pulled out of the capital city of Kabul. If they had held on to Bagram Air Force Base, our military would have had a place to operate from. When we pulled out of there, all we had were civilian jetliners.
Oh, right.
And it was during that phase that we saw a lot of horrible stuff. And we ended up leaving countless weapons there, countless munitions there, and we ended up looking like we were chased out of Afghanistan by the Taliban. They got to have a moral victory, and we looked worse. We looked weaker than we have since May of 1975 when we lost Saigon. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I remember us talking about it and hearing about it. I just didn't know if there was something like
no, that's what it was. And again, look, Americans can agree or disagree about whether or not pulling out of Afghanistan was a good idea. Very few Americans, in honesty, would say that the way we did it was wise. Many people who would want us to have pulled out would not have said that was the best way to do it. And it is that I'm saying weakened Biden. Most Americans, even many Democrats, would argue that the way he pulled out was bizarre and needlessly embarrassing.
I don't honestly think that he would go to war in Ukraine considering how he handled Afghanistan, because he pulled out fast. It was cowardly and uncoordinated, which ended a bunch of lives that did not need to be ended. Those of our allies and of our own men. So I honestly don't think that he has the leadership skills or the guts to basically go to war against Russia.
I love the way you said that on a personal level. Again, I am trying to be as diplomatic as I can and probably failing miserably, but I feel what you just said as much as I heard it. Thank you. But the thing is, weakness is not always going to lead to peace. Sometimes weakness leads to war, and that's what I'm mentioning here. Do you have more to say before I go to?
He's possibly playing that card, but that is not the card that you want to play right now. You want to play the strong card and not if you're weak, considering the current state of China and Russia, considering they are both trying to regain strength or
Yep.
appear that way.
I agree. At the same point, if we let Putin take the Ukraine, we put Taiwan at existential risk. There's no reason why the Chinese wouldn't go across at that point because we'd show that we were complete patsies. Anyway, yes.
I think Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan is kind of just a culmination of the entire withdrawal process in general, because a lot of people, like from when Trump was in office in 2016, he started his withdrawal. I've done a lot of research on this topic. A lot of people thought that it was going well. It was not going well. Like 2016, 2017, okay, it was all right. We were slowly decreasing manpower, and what we were leaving behind were the special operations guys who their entire job, like Army Special Forces,
Is to go after
work with the populace and like integrate work with the populace and help them fight. But over time, they slowly more restrictions were being placed on what American troops can do in Afghanistan, how they can actually commence operations, like the whole planning process for an Army ODA, which is what ours. I won't explain what that is, but
You're saying that our rules of engagement restricted our ability to act.
Yeah, and the whole planning process is they have to send a mission package up the chain of command. But there's two different operations that were going on in Afghanistan: Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Freedom Sentinel. And only one of those operations allowed for actual offensive action against.
Yeah, that's Enduring Freedom.
No, that's Operation Freedom Sentinel.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought
It's
Enduring
entirely
Freedom was the
different.
original.
Well,
Okay,
it
go
was,
on.
But
Yeah.
because that's the actual one against the Taliban and Al Qaeda.
Okay, fine.
But slowly they're getting their hands tied more and more behind their back, and they can't do anything. Well, Trump, he was kind of a crazy guy. Like on a personal level, if you talk to his advisors, he was nuts. But they're taking more and more troops out, and those troops can do less and less to the point where you have a hospital getting accidentally bombed in northern Afghanistan because you've got pilots on the air that are looking down and they're like, okay, is that the target? And the guys on the ground can't get close enough or do anything to say, yes, that's actually the target.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah.
Look, understand, just like I think rapists and child molesters should be executed, I don't think American troops should be deployed unless we use 1945 rules of engagement. I think that having tight rules of engagement in combat is insane, suicidal, and impeachable.
Mm-hmm.
And if our ROEs were restricted in that way, that's a damn shame.
Yeah,
for everyone involved.
Now you have Biden withdrawal where it's kind of just a culmination of bad leadership. Because after 2016, all those guys that were like, I think colonel up, no matter what branch of the military, is those guys that were there, the actual door kickers, the pipe hitters is what they're called.
Yeah.
That are there to really just kill people and blow stuff up and actually fight, are slowly getting phased out to where you just have guys that are focused on career progression. That now you have Ukraine where there's all these guys that were there during the Global War on Terror that kind of somehow managed to avoid any real combat and just progress their career. That are like, oh, we have to make contingencies now?
Yeah, it's not about the paperwork.
Yeah.
It's about lives and death. And I appreciate the detailed knowledge that you bring. No BS, I really do, just as I appreciate Jane's spirit. We have a military that is way too bureaucratic, way too political. And if we end up in a real war, that's going to change fast. Or if it doesn't, we're going to lose.
The actual guys that fight the war, I feel like even with all the restrictions that happen, they're always going to find a way to fight that.
Of course they
will, and always keep that standard of combat effectiveness that I think America is known for. But the top end of the military will always piss me off with how bureaucratic they are and how political they are.
Yeah, no, it makes no sense. I could go on. Thank you. Yes.
So I was wondering, how bad is Biden's mental stability? You said he's having mental.
I have no idea. I can tell you this.
Like age and that stuff. I know
Okay.
much, but...
I didn't believe the man had what it took to become president during the campaign. Not because he was a liberal Democrat. There was that too, but because he campaigned from his basement because of COVID. No, my grandmother had Alzheimer's. My favorite actor, Charlton Heston, had Alzheimer's. My favorite president, Ronald Reagan, had Alzheimer's. And I've observed Alzheimer's close and far, and my mom has dementia. The man, when he's not being scripted and controlled by his wife and the people around him, looks like that to me. But I'm not a doctor. I have no magic bubble or crystal ball. I can't magic bubble. I have no window into the man's soul. I personally do not believe that Mr. Biden is physically or mentally fit to handle the responsibilities of the presidency. I would have felt that way if that had happened to Trump. If Reagan had that happen during his presidency, I would have felt the same way. You cannot have a president of the United States, postulatedly leader of the free world, operating on autopilot and letting the advisors make the calls. It won't work. So my concern, and it's a concern, is that he might not be fit for authority or the responsibility or the heavy hours and the hard work a real president needs to do. Go on.
What happens if he can't?
Well, the Constitution says that what happens is that his advisors come together and make the vice president president. But she is political kryptonite. She is not, I mean, talk about unpopular. She also, how can I put this diplomatically? She was chosen because she was a black woman, not because she was accomplished. How dare he? Yeah, it's what Biden said. It's just like he's saying for the Supreme Court. I'm going to choose a black woman. She was a senator who accomplished very little. Before that, she was Attorney General of California. That's not a deep resume for leader of the free world. So there are concerns that if they replace Biden with Harris, politically it will be bad for the party. But that's what they're supposed to do. And if Harris is unable to, it goes to Nancy Pelosi, who's the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Now, presumably, if the Republicans do well in November, there'll be a Republican Speaker. But the Democrats are not going to put a Republican in the presidency that way. And so it's just, and if it's not Nancy, it's Chuck Schumer, who's actually, I forget who the president pro tem. It's not a good situation because they don't want to replace Biden with Harris. That's what it comes down to. Any other thoughts or comments before we go on, Sam?
So I guess I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I think like for like a country government situation to work, there has to be something that is like uniting the people, something given. And I think like it's unfortunate because the things that used to unify us as a society are kind of deemed as being
Problematical is the word they like to use.
there you go. And I guess it's just unfortunate because the only other solution right now that would be politically acceptable would be war. But I honestly don't, I'm not 100% against it because as long as the motives behind it are not getting his popularity rating up, as long as the motives behind it are, okay, we need to make a show of strength here, I'm fine with that.
I'm conflicted about it too. I'm usually a pretty hawkish fellow. I usually tend to think that military force is not a bad thing if wielded in a good and effective way. But at this point, I'm conflicted. I don't know what I think.
Yeah.
And I thought about this too.
And
So,
I don't know, I just think it's kind of interesting because it's like his ideas have eliminated all the things that would strengthen his political security as
it would still be possible for him to change if he wanted to.
It's just ironic though, because it's like his ideas destroy the things that make him popular.
Well, defund the police destroys the cities where Democrats tend to live, and nobody wants to live in a crime zone.
Exactly.
So,
I just find that super weird.
Yeah, logically, so do I. Be quick,
I
please.
just have a question. So, talking about the plan of presidential succession, who's the current Secretary of State?
Secretary of State is Anthony Blinken. Yeah. Anthony Blinken is a Democrat, a think tank guy. He doesn't have a deep political resume. I think he's not, but no. What it goes is President, Vice President, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Senate, President pro tem of the Senate, and then it goes Secretary of State. President pro tem of the Senate was an elected official. It's usually the oldest senior senator of the dominant party. So that's, and then we go Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and we go down the list of cabinet officials.
Since I was in civics.
What?
Yeah.
In civics, we learned it was President, Vice President, Speaker of the House, Sec State, Second.
No,
Yeah.
that is not as I learned. No, President pro tem I think goes before Sec State, but we'll look at.
right.
I'll look into it. You do too. You do that too. They might have changed it since I was educated. I mean, I am old. Yeah.
I mean, what he's saying, I mean, it doesn't really matter because from the way it sounds, They are all of the same party, so
Yeah.
most likely their opinion on what to do is going to be the exact same.
Most likely. I still think that I want to hope that somebody is going to rise to the occasion and do what's good for the country. This president over here, Harry Truman. Harry Truman was a Missouri Party Democrat. He was put into power by a local crime boss named Pendergast. The man was connected to some real dark stuff. And during World War II, his committee tried cutting military waste, and it wasn't necessarily always good for the war effort. He was not supposed to be vice president. But Franklin Roosevelt's 1944 vice presidential candidate was closely tied to Stalin's Russia. And it was discovered. So he was out, and Roosevelt's people chose Truman. Roosevelt dies a couple of months into his fourth term. That's creepy too. So Truman becomes president, and he is amazingly humble about it all. He really is an incredible guy. Now, I don't agree. He was a liberal Democrat. I do not agree with everything he said or did. But as humble as he was, he took responsibility. He was willing to change to adapt to situations. And he stood up to Joe Stalin. If it wasn't for him, there wouldn't have been a Cold War. The Soviets would have probably taken Europe. And the entire history of the world would have been different. So I have him up there because he was somebody that the important people called a nobody. How could this guy who used to run a hat stand, a haberdashery, how could he be president? He actually turned out to be a good president because he tried to do the right thing most of the time. If somebody could do that, even if I don't like their politics, I'll respect them for having integrity. I hope that if the situation requires it, that somebody does. For the good of the country and the world. Thank you for the conversation. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So, Bismarck. Bismarck has Prussia's army. Now, one of Prussia's strengths is they invent the general staff. What is a general staff? Well, in most armies, officers rise through the ranks by commanding armies in the field. This becomes bad in the Pentagon, but it isn't bad at first. What the Prussians do is they take the most intellectually gifted officers out of line command and put them in a planning bureau called the General Staff. They're not all generals. What they do is nothing but war planning. They plan how to use rail lines to move troops most efficiently, how to get the right amount of gunpowder and the right amount of shells to the right place at the right time. And they do nothing but war planning against every possible opponent. So when most armies of that time begin a war, this happened in our Civil War. The general in command of the field army says, okay, what are we going to do? And then he comes up with a war plan on the fly. Now that's fine when you're talking about tactics within a battle. But having a war plan to determine how the units move, where they move, when they move, in the 1800s proves to be breakthrough stuff. So Prussia is going to have a war plan. Look, you have two equally capable opponents. If one of them has a plan and one of them does not, the one with the plan usually wins. Having a plan for victory coheres everything. It's like having a thesis in a good essay. So Prussia's general staff allows their military to have war plans that nobody else has at this point. Soon, after these wars, the rest of the world is going to learn how the general staff operates. And I would argue the American Pentagon, which is what comes out of our general staff, is a distortion of what the Prussians did. The Prussian general staff actually produces genuine war plans. It's not political at all. It's about, if we have to fight, we're apolitical, we're not political at all, we're going to win. So the general staff gives the Prussian army an edge in planning. The Germans also have incredible industries that they're building in the mid-1800s, particularly the Krupp's steelworks. Krupp's are the people who make the artillery and the railroads and all of the other equipment that Prussia needs to go to war. So having this steel industry is going to allow the Prussians to build a lot of weapons quickly. Also, you have this region here. This region here is called the Ruhr, R-U-H-R. Actually, it's mostly to the east of the Rhine River. In any event, the Ruhr is a hilly region with lots of coal reserves and lots of iron. It was and remains the industrial heartland of all of Europe. The Ruhr, to this day, is where most of Europe's heavy industry it operates. So, how is it that this region, this little region, is so important? Because steel, which is the heart of industrial age warfare, requires coal and iron. And the ability to work that into steel in larger and larger and quicker in greater and greater batches. And this all develops in the industrial war. The Ruhr gives Germany, Prussia, and then Germany a great advantage in war. And after World War II, one of the things behind the idea of the European Union was an international body called the European Steel and Coal Association, which, despite the fact that the Ruhr is definitely inside of German territory, controls the Ruhr. So the Ruhr, after World War II, is never under German control. It is under international control, it's under EU control today, to prevent the Germans from starting another war on their own. The third great invention that the Prussians bring is called the Dreys Needle Gun. It shoots a very small bullet, but the Dreys Needle Gun is the basis for what is called a bolt-action rifle. A bolt-action rifle, you all probably know what a cowboy gun is, a lever-action rifle. It's a repeating arm, you got a bunch of bullets in a tube, and you go ching-ching, ching-ching. You go ching-ching, you load it around, and then boom, and then ching-ching, and then boom. The problem with that mechanism, ching-ching, is soldiers like to hug the ground because the ground stops bullets. Having to lift up to go chink-chink or go side to side or whatever is an obnoxious motion. So what is developed in the Dreys Needle Gun is a mechanism which is going to become the basis of all major military weapons throughout World War I and into World War II. It's called a bolt-action rifle. So you chamber around by doing some variant of this motion. Okay, you feed a bullet in. Now the bullet is there. And it's a much more efficient movement with the wrist and the hand. It allows for quicker firing. With the Dreys Needle Gun, the Prussian army is going to be able to fire more rounds accurately downrange than most of their opponents. The French are going to have a better weapon in 1870, but the Danish and the Austrians do not. So the Dreys Needle Gun is going to give the Prussians a very good military weapon. The Krupp steel mill and the Ruhr is going to give Prussia the industrial wherewithal to fight, and the general staff is going to give Prussia the ability to do extensive war plans. Okay. The Danish War is not fought with bear claws, which is just a funny image to me because I like bear claws. I like Danish. It's Danish. The Danish War is about two provinces, Schleswig and Holstein. At the beginning of of Bismarck's Wars of Unification, Denmark's border is down here, and Denmark controls Holstein and Schleswig. Bismarck creates a pretext for war, where the Danes seem to be violating German territory, German tourists, German interests. And he gets the Austrians to join with Prussia to fight the Danes. So, the Prussian army, aided by the Austrians, marches into Holstein and seizes both Holstein and Schleswig. The Danes fight, they lose. Now, When Bismarck goes to war against the Danes, why do the Austrians join in? Because Bismarck has made it seem that German honor, and the Austrians are still Germans, was being assaulted. Bismarck also makes it clear that anyone who takes part in the war in a major way will be in on the spoils. So the Austrians, who are opportunists, decide, let's support Prussia, and they did. Now, after the war, one would expect that Holstein would go to Prussia because Prussia would control Mecklenburg. Prussia's territory would be contiguous with Holstein. So you just enlarge Prussia with Holstein. Schleswig, you would expect to go to the Austrians. But that isn't what Bismarck does. Bismarck's very clever. He decides that Prussia is going to take Schleswig. Austria is going to take Holstein. So every Prussian man, woman, and child that wants to cross from Prussia proper to Prussian Schleswig has to go through Holstein. This is going to create friction. It's going to create problems. Every time a customs official is rude to a little old lady, it's going to make the Prussian papers. Oh, those Prussians, they're being pigs. They're assaulting our women. They're making our women get patted down. They're doing things to us. We can't allow it. So by giving Holstein, the southernmost province, to Austria, Bismarck is going to create a pretext for war with Austria whenever he wants. The war with Denmark is in 1864. In 1866, the pretext for war with Austria materializes. The Prussian army marches south from Silesia, and at a place called Zadawa, crushes the Austrian forces. Prussia is absolutely superior on the battlefield. And Austria sues for peace. Now, the German military commander, von Moltke, wants to march through Vienna and take a bunch of territory. Bismarck says, no, we're not marching through Vienna. We're not going to humiliate the Austrians, and we're not going to take their territory. We won. What we get is that Austria is out. We're going to have a Klein Deutschland Germany. Austria is out. Free and clear. But there's going to come a time very soon where we're going to need the Austrians to be friendly to us. And if we rub their noses in their defeat now, they won't be. The army is not happy. They just had a lot of their guys killed. They want to rub the Austrians' noses in it, but they go along with Bismarck because Bismarck controls the king. So, in the 7 Weeks' War, Bismarck is able to kick Austria out. Also, as part of the 7 Weeks' War resolution, every part of Germany north of the Rhine joins in a defensive alliance called the North German Confederation. An attack on any one of these German states is an attack on all. Oh, yes, and Austria obviously gives up Holstein. That becomes part of Prussia. So Prussia expands. Denmark is reduced in size because of the Danish War. In the 7 Weeks' War, Austria is kicked out of Germany, but aside from losing Holstein, they don't have to give anything up because Bismarck doesn't want them resentful. The North German Confederation is set up so that if anyone attacks anyone within the Confederation, they all are going to have Prussia's help. Prussia, which has apparently the best army in the world right now, and it did, except maybe the British. The British was much smaller. Anyone in the North German Confederation would have the confidence of knowing that the Prussian army was with them. But it's a defense alliance. And it's that defense alliance nature that's going to come into play next time. Any questions, comments, or thoughts? Okay. Yes?
Okay, so before Bismarck, I'm sorry if you went over this, but there was just a bunch of different provinces.
Yes, a bunch of different states, a bunch of different countries.
And that was the result of
That was the result of the Holy Roman Empire being so disorganized. Thank you. Come again.